fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I am Al Warren. My co-host today is Michael Hawley. How you doing?
That is correct, and today is good because my wife would love the Tales of Arus. She is all into this stuff, so I'm excited to talk about this stuff.
Well, I guess she would have to be being married to you, right?
Yeah, and I fear her too. So she would be one of those female tough ladies in the book or something. So
yeah, she would be into fantasy, you know. She's well, speaking of that, so we've got the writer of the Tales of Arus, Becoming Fire and Lightning. So this is Terrance Niedziela. So thank you for being here, Terrance.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Wow, Tales of Arus. So this is book one of one. Is there going to be a series? Is that what you're doing here?
Yeah, with the Fire and Lightning series, it's just going to be a trilogy. And then there will be additional books that fill out that series.
That world.
Yeah, when I created that world, I have 80,000 years worth of history. Like even in the book, I have like this massive timeline. This is when different things are happening. Other side projects are just filling in that timeline.
Do you have a character that's sort of like Michael, who's about 80,000 years old? That helps you.
No, I don't. But I do have some characters.
Those are the wise ones.
Yes. I actually do have some characters that are thousands of years old, and they are the wise ones, yes.
When you say, okay, there's going to be a trilogy in the Fire and Lightning part series, maybe let's talk about that before we get into the book itself. How do you go about doing this series? Like, do you have the 3 books kind of already in mind, and then you kind of start one at a time and go as it comes, or do you have it all kind of beginning, middle, and end all sort of together and you know where it's going to go?
When I first started, I wasn't even planning on doing a trilogy. It was supposed to be a short story as a present to my youngest sister. It was supposed to be for her 17th birthday. That's why Michael's sister, which is also one of the main characters in the book, is 17. But it kind of morphed over the 20 years that I was working on it into a novel, and then it morphed into a trilogy. And so I pretty much have it planned out. There's some of it that I don't know yet, but the overall basic, this is how everything's going to go, is kind of in my head. And so some of it is like I have started, the second and the third book. A lot of it is going to be just kind of as I go, filling it out and that kind of thing.
So let's talk about the first book, Tales of Aras. What is the basic premise of this book? What goes on?
The older of the 2 main characters, Michael, he just got done getting his PhD at the University of Tel Aviv and ancient Jewish history. He comes home. His desire is to rebuild his relationship with his youngest sister, and that's kind of his main thing. But before he even sees her, he is taken to another world and finds out that Emai, who is the Lord of Light and Life, has chosen him to be one of his Elash, basically a flaming knight. His job is to fight against Baarel's legion, and Baarel is this 7-headed evil dragon. And so he ends up learning what it means to be a knight, what it means to use the power that Emai has given him, and is basically like flowing through him. And then Cassandra, she's also sucked into this world, and she learns that...
Is that the sister?
Yeah, that's the sister. She is chosen to be the speaker, the ambassador of reconciliation between the 7 races of this world, who all basically hate each other. But they need to reconcile and unify if they're going to stand against the Legion. And so both of them have an evil character that is hunting them, wants to kill and eat them, and that's always fun, right? Michael has a 3,000-year-old tiger warrior who is his mentor and is immortal. And Cassandra has this dragon, this purple and silver dragon that breathes ice instead of fire. She's the only one of her kind, who is her teacher. The book basically goes through them learning, because it's all about becoming fire and lightning. They realize that they are the fulfillment of this ancient prophecy that talks about in Aras's darkest hour, Emai will send a fire and lightning. And then They'll unify the country, destroy the evil, set the captives free, all these different kinds of things. And everybody has their own view of what these two people are supposed to do and be like. And they have to realize that it's basically doing what Amai chose them to do and not try and fit everyone else's mold. So that's the basic premise of the first book.
So, Dr. Michael Jenkins, who is that character to you? Like, what kind of relationship do you have with him? Like, and I mean that in a sense of, do you hear him? Do you see him? Do you kind of know what he would look like? How he would present himself, how he feels? Like, do you have that kind of relationship, or is it more distant and it's from somewhere different?
Oh no, I definitely know him well, because in a lot of ways he's me. My bachelor's degree is in ancient Middle East history, and my original goal was to become a PhD and all of that kind of thing. So a lot of his responses, a lot of what he does is the way I would have responded when I was his age, because he's 27. Unlike him, I didn't grow up in a loving family like he did. And so he's sort of like an idealized version of what I had wished that I could have been when I was his age. There are some times, though, when I was writing his character that I was surprised. Like, he surprised me with some of his responses, because the character writes itself over time. You kind of have a framework of what you'd like the character to do and say and think. And sometimes it takes a mind of its own, and you're like, wow, that kind of surprised me, or I never expected that, even though it's coming out of me onto the page, right? There's some things that are similar and some things not so, but I don't know if that kind of answers your question.
Yeah. It's just, and it's, so it's someone you experience and you hear a voice in a sense, and he gives you his answers in that. So he does affect the story outline. He can actually change things.
Right.
What do you think the hardest thing is about writing this story? Is it the world building itself? Is it the character development? What's been the most challenging thing for you?
Definitely not the world building. Like, I have a hyper obnoxious imagination, and I love world building. Everything from the geography to the flora and fauna to the races and everything. I love it. In fact, my publisher said that some of the creatures I created are the most terrifying things she has ever seen in her life. I would have to say the character development, just because I didn't want the characters to be flat. And while I am kind of using some of the fantasy tropes, you have the hero who is willing and that kind of thing. As far as with Michael, Cassandra's a little bit more unwilling because of her own insecurities and stuff as a kid. Just really making sure that with all their flaws and things, that it's realistic. They're not too overpowered. With the various supernatural things that they're able to do, having limitations and things, and even with their interactions with the people of that world, making sure that would be a realistic response. Because the first versions of these characters, they were not as odd with being in this completely strange world. They just kind of took everything. Yeah, okay. I'm in this world, and there's trees with orange leaves and glowing cuneiform writing on the trees, and creatures and evil sorcerers shooting purple lightning at me and whatever, and just, oh, that's okay, whatever. And those who helped me develop these characters and critique and things, they said, that's not normal. You don't just pop into another world and just, no matter how nerdy you are, you're still going to be odd and that kind of thing. So definitely that, and the fight scenes. The fight scenes were definitely a challenge. And I had an amazing lady who came alongside me. She knows the historical European martial arts. She was able to teach me how to use a sword and various techniques for blocking and things. And I would run various fight scenes through her and be like, no, that wouldn't work. And this wouldn't work. And no, you'd actually lose your head and your arm if you tried that, and that kind of thing. And so that was also another thing that really was a bit challenging.
So now, when you take your character, like someone like Jenkins, like one of your main characters, and from beginning to end, did he go where you think he was going to go? Did he grow in the right place? Did you see the changes that you wanted? or was it completely a surprise how he turned out?
That's a very good question. In some ways, in a few small ways, he grew kind of the way I expected. But in a lot of ways, it was different. Like it was kind of surprising. And of course, this being the first book in a trilogy, he has a lot more growing to do. But just by the end of the first book, I'd have to say that there were some ways that kind of were surprising the way he grew. He grew in leadership. He's thrown into a leadership position that he was not expecting. In fact, his first big leadership role is in the middle of a battle, and things are not going well at all. As I say, the poo has hit the fan, and it's looking like, game over. Well, he has this epiphany, and that was an epiphany I was not planning, but the character kind of had this epiphany, and he steps into this role and completely changes things in the battle, and part of it is Theoden speech to the Rohirrim type of, thing, like if I quote from Lord of the Rings series, and rallies them and kind of gets them to, his side to come together and all that they do in the midst of that battle. And I'm excited to see how he's going to grow in the future. Some of the other characters that he's going to come across and how those are also going to be mentor type characters, and just some of the overwhelming odds that he's going to face and how that's going to mold him. I'm excited to see where that goes.
Were his fighting skills already there innate before when he came over, or did he have to learn how to fight too?
Good question. He was already a martial artist. He has a second-degree black belt in both Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and in Taekwondo. But the skills as far as using the sword, he has to learn that. He threw the javelin in high school and track, so that helps him somewhat with his spear wielding, but there's the majority of his fighting is he has to learn it. Learning how to take what he's learning, the new things, and blend it with the martial arts techniques he already knows, and seeing how those two balance each other is an experience that is really thrilling to him, and sometimes very confusing. Because like, how do I do this when I know this, and that kind of thing.
Do you have a subtext throughout the story? Is there a meaning that you hope people pick up that's underneath the entertainment? And and sometimes it doesn't come planned. Sometimes it's just organically, it develops from the story itself or the characters. So, is there a subtext?
Yes, definitely. The book is written from a Christian point of view. And so the biggest thing is twofold. One is the goodness of God, and that even though evil seems to be winning and, people have the questions, how could there be evil in the world when you have a good God? And that the whole thing of we have free will to choose between good and evil. But there are consequences for that. But in the midst of that too, with the goodness of God, is coming to realize that the plan that he has for us when he created us, he has a good plan for us. That was his original will for us. And we can choose whether we go with that plan or not. But if we go with it, we're going to face trials. We're going to face hardship. We're going to face overwhelming odds and things that are going to come. And it looks like there's no way we can get through it. But as we rely on him, we rely on his word, his Holy Spirit, and just rest in his love and his ability, the adventure we go on is going to be infinitely greater than anything we could ever imagine. And that's really the biggest thing that I would like people to get from the book, is that God is good and that what he has planned for us is way better than we could imagine.
When you write a story like this, and even a series like As You're Gonna Go, so the first book is done and it's out. When you look back at it from today compared to when you were just starting, do you think this process has changed you in any way? Like, will you do a different type of writing from this story into the next book?
I think so. I think that anyone who truly dedicates themselves to creating is going to grow from that process. I can't tell you the number of times when I wanted to give up on this and just be like, I'm done. I am so over this, wanting to give up, wanting to move on to other things, or just, there were some times where I'm like, I just want to give up writing, period. But I learned a lot about the grace of God. I learned a lot about perseverance And I learned a lot in my craft as well, with description and character building and all those things. So yes, definitely the next book is going to be better than the first one, simply because I've learned so much. And my hope is that every book that comes out will be way better than the previous one, and that people will be able to not only enjoy the stories, but also see the growth, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's part of the process. Where did it come from for you, in the sense of, have you been writing since you can remember, or is this a later thing that just started happening? How do you know, or how do you feel comfortable being able to write and publish something and have people read it? You know, like where does that come from, do you think?
Well, I've been creating stories ever since I was really little. You know, I'm the oldest of 6 kids. And so one of the things that I would do is I would tell stories to my siblings, and I kind of watch their faces and look to see, you know, are they bored, you know, and change the story as I go. But the first time I ever sat down to write a book was in 4th grade. And then from that, when I got to 7th grade, I was ready to give up on writing. I wrote to escape abuse, to escape messed up home life, school life, things like that. I created worlds that I could submerge myself into. And so maybe that's part of the reason why they're so vivid for me, but I made them very realistic. In 7th grade, I was ready to give up on a lot of things. My parents had divorced when I was in 5th grade. Home life got infinitely worse, and stuff at school got infinitely worse. And my 7th grade English teacher, Miss Subtext, kind of pulled me aside and encouraged me in my writing. And years later, I thanked her, and I said, you know, if it had not been for you, I would have completely given up. And she gave me this kind of puzzled look, and she was like, I just did my job. To a kid that was ready to give up on everything, it meant a lot, you know. And then in high school is when I really committed and dove into writing, and I really just went all out with it. So from the 7th grade, dabbling a bit more, but especially in high school and then beyond, once I graduated, was when I really just went all full tilt, dove into creation. And what I found is that when I'm not creating, when I'm not writing, I'm like the guy in the Snickers commercial, you know, that's like, you know, Betty White or Darth Vader. And, you know, it's like, dude, you need a Snickers because you're not your normal self. And for me, that's with writing. Terrance becomes very ornery and just not a fun person to be around when he's not writing, when he's not creating. And so that was really the hint that I was called to this, that it wasn't just like a little dabble thing like a lot of people do, but it really was a calling on my life.
And so you had quite a bit of history in like Middle East and stuff like that. That was kind of what you were schooling for, right? And
yeah.
How much of your real life, or how much of your education do you apply to this world?
Quite a bit, actually. As I created the history, the conflicts, especially the racial strife and the cultural strife between the different races, I drew a lot from my education and my own personal experiences.
Well, you were talking about how much of your own personal life or your personal education, like in Middle Eastern history, how much of that you apply to the worlds you're building? Definitely
in the conflicts, I have applied a lot. Battle tactics, things of that sort, things that I learned in my historical studies, the racial tensions between my different races, because I mean, I have dragons, I have reptile-like creatures, I have fish people, I have almost like ant-like people that live underground, I have regular-looking people, I have, you know, all of these different, I have cat people, along with a lot of other different types of races and creatures and things. And so a lot of that I drew. Plus, I'm a huge fan of Tolkien. And of course, J.R.R. Tolkien is all about creating these vast worlds, very complex history. I love the Silmarillion, but I have to listen to an audiobook. I tried reading it and I couldn't, but if I would listen to it, it was amazing. I loved it.
How about C.S. Lewis too?
Yes. C.S. Lewis is a huge influence. George MacDonald, who influenced C.S. Lewis. So some of those classic writers, even people like Dickens and some of the other classical writers that I grew up with, you know, Tale of Two Cities and Great Expectations and some of those different things, all of those really influenced me a lot. And I've been reading since I was really little. And so I went into 3rd grade with an 8th grade reading level. Yeah, so I devoured books, literally. Like I would go through a thick novel in a day like it was nothing. So all of the different stories and things that I ingested, most of them I still remember, but it's only with certain things. But stories, movies, I'm a kid of the 80s and 90s, so cartoons and movies and shows and all those things, all of it added to this vast plethora of ideas to draw from. And I saw what worked and I saw what didn't, and it became this whole hodgepodge of crazy, imaginative type, stuff that I could draw from and create to where I'm at now.
This book comes out May 19th. How long before you start getting on to the second book? Or do you take a break, or are you writing that right now?
What I planned on doing is actually between each of the books in the trilogy, I am creating a standalone book that gives, it's like the backstory of one of the major side characters. And so the first book ends with Michael having a conversation with a guy that he's heard about. He's one of those ancient guys, ancient heroes. And he's heard about him throughout the book, and people are like, this guy's amazing, and all the cool things he did. And he finally gets a chance to meet this guy. And Amai, the Lord of Light, tells him that you need to learn this guy's story. You need to hear this guy's story before you move on to the next part of your mission, because there's things in that story you need to learn. And so it's almost like Amai is saying, okay, you sit down and you learn from a master. And so the last two lines in the book, the first book, is the first two lines of the next book that are coming out. So the next book is the Saga of Niklas, which is this guy's story. And then book 2 of the trilogy will come out after this standalone. And then Captain Ragnar, the Immortal Tiger, his story comes out next after the second book in the trilogy. And then the third book in the trilogy comes out, and that ends the trilogy. I kind of took a page out of Marvel Universe and the way they did their movies. It was like Thor will appear in, the Avengers. I kind of did the same sort of thing. And so I think hopefully it'll work, and my readers will like the fact that I'm filling in those things that way. And
well, I'm sure they will. For readers and listeners, where can they find Terrance? Do you have a website? Do you use social media, book signings? What's going on for you in the next little while?
Yeah, so you can go to terranceniedziela.com, and that's my website. And then they can find me on Facebook, Terrance Niedziela Jr., and also the Tales of Arus Facebook page, which is directly for this world and all of that kind of stuff. They can find me there. And I'm also on Instagram, Terrance Niedziela Jr. They can find me there as well.
Well, fantastic. Now we're going to put that up on our website so people can find it easily. Don't miss out on it. And we appreciate you being here. Now the book, Tales of Aras, and it's becoming Fire and Lightning. And it's been Terrance Niedziela Jr. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Great speaking with you.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.